Hello, I trust that you've listened to the 3-minute presentation about how we have moved forward in the last 1600 years with regard to how we treated children. If not, please go to www.parentingwithloveandselfunderstanding.com. Please bear in mind what I said in it, that what I would have been booed off the stage for back then is likely to provoke a similar reaction in some people in what I'm about to present to you now. What has happened over those last 1600 years is that we've learned a fraction more about love, and this presentation will hopefully help you understand it just a little bit more. I like to believe that the more we understand about something, the easier it is to fix and the better it runs, whether it's computers or cars. Love is no different. For thousands of years, human beings have been unaware of why they turn out the way they do, and perhaps more importantly, the way their children do. Now, in the 21st century, we know through psychotherapy and neuroscience what plays a major role in how good our self-esteem will be, how our intelligence may be affected, and also, depending on the viewpoint of the medical practitioner, how healthy we will be. It comes down to the quality of love. Please note I said major role, not all. Now, before I go any further, science now knows enough about the body chemicals produced by the various glands to make assessments of what effects they have on the body and brain. They know that love produces certain chemicals that have a positive effect on the brain and the body, which has long-term effects on our health and self-esteem. For those of you who want more on this, there are 2 easy-read books that go into detail. One is The Science of Parenting by Margot Sunderland, with pictures on every page. The other is Why Love Matters by Sue Gerhardt, which is slightly more technical. Going back to what I said about the quality of love, what do I mean by that? Most people know love as a good feeling, and because it makes us feel good, we yearn for it. And that applies particularly to the feelings towards our children. What do you think the difference is between these 2 mothers? Jenny was a welfare client who I used to see when I worked for a charity. Her 18-year-old daughter was killed, and she was absolutely devastated, as she loved her so dearly. Fortunately, she said, she had 2 or more children to love. 2 or so years later, I met the other 2 children and observed how she behaved towards them. Stop that! Behave! Be quiet! All the words I heard. No attempt to engage fully with them, as she was either lost in her own world or texting her friends. And when the 8-year-old hurt himself, her response was, "Big boys don't cry." She had no concept of boundaries and felt that by enforcing them, she would lose the love of her children. Would it surprise you if I told you that her 14-year-old had already been in trouble with the police? In one session, I'd asked her whether she read to her children at bedtime, and she looked at me in complete puzzlement. She didn't know that this was something she was supposed to do, yet she loved all of them. Obviously, this type of loving is better for a child than not feeling loved and cared for at all. Another of my clients, Anne, displayed a totally different way of showing her love for her children by being there for them when they spoke, hearing what they had to say, and answering them in a way that encouraged dialogue. She was patient with them, and never did I hear her behave in a way that made them feel that she was cleverer than them, or respond in a controlling or patronizing or matronizing way. And if their feelings were hurt, she would empathize with them by ensuring that they knew she understood how they felt. Observing them, one could see their aliveness, their confidence, their respect for others, and hear the intelligence in their conversations. I believe the difference comes down to the quality of love, the mom's awareness of how to respond to her children so they felt loved, held, and understood, the willingness to drive those loving feelings towards the loved person. Let's take these individually. The quality of love. We can only know our own feelings of love. Some people love their pets more than their kids. Others love their partners or parents more. It's an individual feeling quality, and each one of us has tons of it, only sometimes it's buried and we aren't aware of it. Or, like in Jenny's case, we just don't know how to demonstrate it, which comes down to awareness. We'll talk more about this later. The mom's awareness of how to respond to her children so they felt loved, held, and understood. Being aware of what our children experience as a result of our loving makes a huge difference to them. Jenny was oblivious of the negative impact her ignoring had on them, and unaware that she was failing to meet their psychological needs, whereas Anne was able to give the needed responses to create better well-being. The willingness to drive those loving feelings towards the loved person. While we may be able to bask in loving presence with our children on occasions, we also have to do something with that love in ways that will make a difference. Kind words, caring, or just being emotionally available for them are examples of this. Jenny shopped, fed, and cleaned for her kids, brought them presents for Christmas, but that was about the limit of her driving her feelings out towards them, simply because of her lack of awareness. What can we take from this? We can have big feelings of love for our children, but if we aren't aware of what damages them, we simply perpetuate that damage by being unaware as to what is happening in their psyche. When I asked Anne what prompted her to behave the way she did towards her children, she told me she had read as many books as possible about caring for children. Jenny hadn't even thought about it. It comes down to this. Parenting comes naturally, but it doesn't necessarily come correctly. To that I would add, and naturally doesn't include awareness. Wouldn't you say that it's the awareness quality in love that makes the difference? Let's look at love. Most people understand love as a big feeling, our big feelings, and we're likely to yearn for anyone or anything that will evoke those feelings. We want to feel good, and for most people these big feelings are evoked mostly by our child, our partner, our parents, and our pets. Now, if we think about it, it's suddenly about us. And isn't that just a tad selfish? I'm reminded of a situation of mothers waiting for their child to come out of the gate on their first day at school. One mother, on seeing her child exit the gate, ran across the road and made a huge fuss of him, not realizing that the child's being totally shamed and humiliated by her behavior. Was this love? From the mom's perspective, with her overwhelming feelings of happiness on seeing her son again, yes. Only from the child's perspective, it wasn't. He was trying to create an impression with his new friends, and his mom wrecked it by shaming and embarrassing him. Another example of this selfishness is a client of mine who was telling me about how she had gone off at her 6-year-old daughter because she had wanted to walk from the front door of her house on the stone path to the car without shoes on. When I asked her why she went off, she said she didn't want her daughter cutting her feet on the pedals. When I pointed out that that was highly unlikely and how her 6-year-old might have felt at that going off, my client burst into tears. Further exploration showed that it wasn't about love for her daughter, but her feelings, her anxiety. It was about her, not her daughter. And then there was a time when I just turned 19 and went to pick up a date who lived with her parents on the 19th floor of a high-rise. Her dad, a burly creature twice my size, opened the door and invited me in. Then, in front of his daughter, he picked me up by the front of my jacket and said, "If you touch my daughter, you'll be out of that 19th floor window." I'll never forget the look of horror and shame on his daughter's face. I found out later from her friends that the incident wrecked the relationship with her dad, and things were never the same. In her dad's world, dictated by his big feelings, probably of jealousy and the fear of losing her, he wanted to protect her, but gave no thought to the impact that his behavior would have on her. We now know that while a parent's love is way better than a neglectful, unloving parent, a child's self-esteem, intelligence, and health can suffer if they aren't loved in the way they need to be loved. This missing ingredient is called empathy. If you think of what I said about Jenny and how she treated her children, and the people in the last 3 examples I gave, what was missing was empathy. Empathy, noun. The ability to experience the internal emotional world of another. The ability to understand and share the feelings of another. The feeling that you understand and share another person's experiences and emotions. The ability to share someone else's feelings. If we think about it very carefully, and I hope I don't upset anyone here, how much do we put our own feelings ahead of someone else? Our feelings bubble up at the thought of pouring out our loving feelings to a child. But what if that child doesn't want that experience at that time and just wants to be left in their own world? In such a case, our feelings aren't congruent with the feelings of the child, and that's failed empathy. And if we persist in enforcing our feelings, isn't that selfishness? If this is so, those examples I gave of Jenny, the mom welcoming her child after school, my client going off at her daughter, or the dad wanting to throw me out of the window, are empathy failures driven by selfishness. When we have grown up in settings that have not been conducive to our development because of a lack of empathy, we will have blind spots when it comes to dealing with our children and those around us. And these blind spots, in turn, will create empathy failures or, in some cases, dehumanizing approaches unless we become aware of them. These blind spots can cause us to be completely unaware of what we are doing or not doing. In other words, we don't even have a question to ask regarding a life situation, let alone an answer. We're simply oblivious. Or we only think of ourselves and not of the consequences to our children, simply because we're blind to what they might experience. I'm reminded of a family who had a son who was particularly fearful and shy, but the dad was a sergeant in the army who wanted him to be tough and out there and tried to force him at every opportunity to be like him. Instead of understanding him or having the necessary empathy to see that his son could never live up to that life, he called him a sissy or ignored him whenever his son failed to please him. All this did was crush the child, create more fear, make him feel more useless, and create a bigger inferiority complex, which he took with him into his adult life. And then we have the parents who send their kids to boarding school because the kids will hinder their career, which requires they move around the globe. I have to wonder about the wisdom of parents who go to the trouble of having children and then only see them for a few weeks a year. Why have them? Or we spend time in the pub in the evening, leaving our partner sitting at home with the kids when we could be enjoying them, or by putting our material needs ahead of our children by working 16 hours a day so we can drive a top-of-the-range car instead of giving them the guidance and support needed by them at an early age. Now, don't get me wrong, we need our selfish drives to help us experience and grow. But if you want to have children, you need to factor in ways that don't impair their development. How Not to them up is a great book to help you get a clearer idea of this. Love, then, implies something beyond loving feelings. To keep it simple, big loving feelings are desire. The millions of books written about love are mostly about desire. One of the major problems we have is there are many people rely on their feelings or their emotions to tell them whether they love someone or something. That's how they decide. The ancients, Aristotle being one, broke love down into specifics, namely philia, which they saw as a deep but usually non-sexual intimacy between close friends and family members. Pragma, likely to occur between long-term couples when they recognize the humanness in each other and forge this through commitment, understanding, compromise, and goodwill. Agape excludes our selfish drives and works to create harmony and goodwill for all. Eros, sexual chemistry and lust. Desire. You can look them up in Wikipedia if you want. The point is, we've lost those definitions, and many of us have become confused with regard to the meaning of love. So for many, we now know it as a big feel-good feeling. To keep it simple, Desire has powerful feelings. Love, in its purest state, doesn't. Love is harmlessness, goodwill, caring, empathy. So with children, we can love them to bits in a feeling manner, but we also have to have empathy and awareness, or we end up interfering with their development. Let's go back to my two clients, Jenny and Anne. What do you think the difference between them was? Nothing more than awareness, empathy, and education. They likely both had similar feelings of love, but because of the awareness and education of Anne, she was able to demonstrate the finer qualities of love and empathy. Interestingly, a study that appeared in the National Geographic magazine in January 2015, entitled "The First Year," revealed that typically college educational professionals' children heard an average of 2,153 words an hour spoken to them by their parents, whereas children from families in a lower socio-economic bracket heard an average of 616 words. These families tended to make shorter, perfunctory comments like, "Stop that, behave," whereas parents in the wealthier bracket had extended conversation with their kids. While this might be normal in low socio-economical families to teach children this way, it isn't natural. Normal isn't natural. To this, I would like to add that this survey was likely done in America, but from my own experience, some nouveau riche and upper-class parents in other westernized countries I have met still treat their children in the same low socio-economic ways I've just mentioned. Could my client Jenny have benefited from becoming more aware through a deeper understanding of her children through education? Most definitely. She just didn't know what to do to give them better mental health. We can teach people this if they're interested, and that's the sad part. Many aren't. When I look at some of my clients and the unhealthy behavioral family systems they were brought up in, the following always seems to be there. Dominating family ways which force or bend a child to its oppressive rule. Be who we want you to be, or you won't be a part of us. Maybe take some time to think about this one. Wounding, which is not always traced to physical damage, but embedded in the overall caregiver-child relationship in which the child grows up. The child is not loved in a way in which they need to be loved. Their mothers didn't have it in them to provide good enough care. A complete lack of loving emotional interactions or compassion to them or fellow human beings, or nature, pets or wildlife. Such people, deprived of these experiences, are unable to express what has never been available. They grow up lacking elements of compassion, feelings, and empathy. Unfortunately, it's this very same lack of awareness of a child's psyche that keeps hundreds of millions of children from becoming securely attached, the consequences of which may result in depression, neediness, anxiety, rage, dependency on others, issues of rejection and abandonment, low self-esteem, and uncaring, that is, to be unaware of the dehumanized plight of others. I'd just like to comment on the last one, uncaring, which seems to be more predominant in some cultures than others. People who fall into this bracket see nothing of their own issues. Mention issues and you will likely get, "Nothing wrong with me, mate," simply because they have numbed out some of their emotions because they were too painful, or they weren't subject to natural empathic responses while growing up, which will have left blind spots in their behaviors towards others. Now, having just spoken for the last 20 minutes or so about love, I need to add that some people turn out to be loving, securely attached individuals despite the most awful of childhoods. Why? I don't know. But as my professor used to say, it's the nature of the beast. So a few, a very few, weather the pain of lovelessness or an empathically deprived childhood and go on to lead securely attached, loving lives. For all of us though, whether we have been loved sufficiently or not, the more we can learn about love, the better for all. We've come a long way in understanding it in the last 100 years. How much more will we be aware of it in another 100? Here's something you might want to think about. Consciousness doesn't necessarily come with intelligence. So where do we go from here? By becoming more aware, more conscious of what we are doing to our fellow human beings and children, particularly our children. Love is so much more than big feelings. It's about awareness, empathy, compassion, etc. The more you know about this, the better for you and everyone around you. Books that will be helpful are Happiness, Who Wants It? 2nd edition. How Not to F... them up. Why Love Matters. The Science of Parenting. Parenting from the Inside Out. Thanks for listening.